in the WNTK studio. I have Sheridan Brown and Harry Vogel. They are both from the Loon Preservation Committee. Good morning, gentlemen.
Good morning, Ben.
So, Sheridan, let's talk about this bill. Fishermen use lead weights. There's already some restrictions in states about what type of product, what type of hard metals, heavy metals, can be used to sink your weight down. And so the lead issue comes in, and it pertains to loons. So I'll let you go from there.
Right. Thanks, Ben. Senate Bill 89 would basically restrict the sale and freshwater use of lead sinkers and jigs, which are a hook with a lead weight molded around them, that weigh 1 ounce or less. Currently, we have a law in place that deals with lead sinkers that are 1 ounce or less, and some smaller jigs. But it has a significant gap in it, and we're finding that the jigs in the size covered by Senate Bill 89 are responsible for significant adult loon mortality in the state. And Harry will explain why that's significant, that we're losing so many of the adults over time. So we have a bipartisan bill. Senator Odell is one of the co-sponsors. Jeannie Forrester of Meredith is our prime sponsor. And a good co-sponsorship from throughout the state. So a lot of folks that have recognized this problem.
Yeah, Bob Odell was on Wednesday with me and was talking about the bill. It does have pretty strong bipartisan support, which is pretty rare for me to be able to sit here and not have to have like such a contentious shootout between two different sides. So with that being said about the bills, Harry, when we talk about the loons, now what's happening? Obviously they're eating these pieces of lead.
Yes, they are, yeah. Back in 2010, the Loon Preservation Committee collected 11 loons that had died after ingesting lead sinkers or lead-headed jigs, and that was a record number. And as a result of that record number of lead deaths in a single year, we did this really comprehensive survey of all of the loons that had died from 1989 right through to 2011. And this is something that was done by the Loon Preservation Committee, by a graduate student, Tiffany Grady at University of Wisconsin-Madison, and by Mark Pokris, who's a veterinary pathologist at Tufts University School of Veterinary Medicine. And that study found that almost half, 49%, of the adult loons that we had collected, dead loons that we had collected, had died as a result of swallowing these lead sinkers and lead-headed jigs. So it's by far the largest source of adult loon mortality, and in fact it's 9 times the next largest source of adult loon mortality in New Hampshire. Well, now, this is going to sound like it's out of left field, but why are they eating? Is it something that it looks like prey? What's the story? Are they filter birds? Are they filtering mud? What are they doing to ingest all this lead? We think there are a few different ways in which loons ingest these lead pieces. One is that loons have no teeth, and so loons will typically forage along the lake bottom and pick up small pebbles, and they will ingest those, and they hold that in the gizzard, the muscular portion of their stomach, and they use those as surrogate teeth to grind up the food that they've just eaten. So if we're talking about the very small split shot or the really small lead sinkers, we think that's a plausible mechanism by which they can swallow these. But that doesn't explain the larger sinkers, the larger lead-headed jigs. And we think that those are probably a combination of either... So if an angler is fishing and catches a fish that breaks a line, that fish is going to be trailing a length of line and probably the hook and the sinker or the lead-headed jig as well. And that fish is going to be a little bit slower than the fish next to it. It's going to be acting a little bit erratically, and that's the fish a loon is going to zero in on as an easy meal. The other thing is that if you're fishing with a lead-headed jig, you're looking to catch a fish, but you could catch a loon instead, because a loon's instinct is to strike at something if it flashes by it. So there's a number of different ways and different mechanisms, and we really do think that it's current use. It's not this reservoir of lead tackle along the lake bottom, and we know that because loons are arriving on our lakes now. And they're staying on our lakes until October or November. But a lot of years we don't get our first lead-poisoned loon until June or July. And they peak very strongly in July and August, which is exactly the same time as we have peak boating and peak fishing activity on our lakes.
In the WNTK studio, I have Sheridan Brown and Harry Vogel. They are both from the Loon Preservation Committee. We're talking about getting the lead out of the water and out of fishing tackle. Now, one of the things that comes up with this there's another side here, and you got like the bass fishing federations, which have a pretty strong standing in the state, and they're saying, wait a minute, if you do this to us, it's going to cost us a ton of money. How do you address that type of a question from a group that's being reasonable? I don't think they're being out of line by saying this is going to cost a lot of money on our end to implement. Plus, one of the arguments is that it's not just a matter of having to buy new tackle; it's replacing all their tackle. How do you address that guy now and say, hey, this is why we have to do this?
Right. Well, first of all, there's a significant amount of cost shifting that's going on right now with the loon mortality that's happening. The problem is largely hidden by extensive volunteer work, intensive management that's kept the loon population in the state from going backwards. And that continues to be wiped out by this lead tackle that would be covered by SB89. Just to put it in a metric for you, 6 full seasons of work, 276 artificial nesting rafts that were built by loon preservation volunteers was wiped out by just 38 pieces of tackle.
Wow.
So right now, parties other than those who make and use lead tackle for their recreational pursuits are bearing that environmental cost of continuing to use this toxic substance. So that's part of it, is this equity argument, and it's ironic because that's an argument that Fish and Game has made recently in their quest for search and rescue funding, pointing out that they're spending a lot of hunters and anglers' license fees to support rescue missions when only 14% of those people being rescued are hunters and anglers. So we see an equity argument here as well. And that the actual cost is really largely overstated, I think, by the opposition. For the average angler, this doesn't cost a lot. The alternatives are out there. They're comparable in cost to lead. They perform as well. Sometimes they're actually cheaper than lead. Certainly you can find your outliers that are much more expensive, like any product. But for the most part, the impact is minimal on the average angler. Now, there's no disputing that the guys who are your elite anglers that have bought hundreds of lures, that have got several tackle boxes, they've got a cost that's proportionate to the multitude they own. So I can see some of the opposition there. I don't mean to diminish that any, but at the same time, we're trying to preserve an important natural resource here, and this is having a significant impact on the state's loon population. You also have a lot of industry push against this, because the lead products generate a better profit margin for the manufacturers. And so you have the American Sport Fishing Association that's working with these bass groups to try and stave off any efforts to regulate lead here in New Hampshire and in other places in the country. Massachusetts moved to similar regulations last year as what are proposed in Senate Bill 89. They actually saw an increase in their license sales afterward, so there seems to be no impact on the fishing revenue coming in as far as license fees. Nobody was really driven away, it appears. So this, all in all, has a very minimal cost to it, and the benefits are great. It's something that would have an almost immediate impact for our state's loons, with the exception of the fact there is a 2-year phase-in period in the bill, and again, that's to be sensitive to this issue of cost for the anglers, as well as allowing small retailers out there, large retailers out there, to move their existing inventory so they don't have to take a loss on that. They're given some provisions to sell that during the 2-year phase-in period, or to transfer it to other resellers, or to sell it online to other states that don't have these restrictions even beyond the 2-year phase-in period. So this is a well-thought-out bill that deals with an important problem, something that's having a significant impact on our state's loons, a threatened species, and has taken into consideration those concerns with costs.
Yeah, and I had told you that at another time when we were on the phone that I'm one of those guys that I'm an active angler, and I've switched over myself because of other states, like you said, Massachusetts, Maine has some regulation. We have regulation here about lead. Isn't there some lead regulation now in the state of New Hampshire?
Right.
It's heavier stuff, though.
Current regulation is on sinkers that weigh 1 ounce or less, So that's not going to change under under Senate Bill 89. What changes is the jig standard. Right now, what's limited is jigs that measure 1 inch or less, and this would change that to the same standard as sinkers, which would say jigs weighing 1 ounce or less would now be banned.
All right, I see what you're saying there. In the WNTK news studio, boy, I'm having trouble today. I don't know what the deal is. Anyway, Sheridan, Brown, Harry Vogel, they're both from the Loon Preservation Committee. When we come back, we'll ask them a couple more questions. You want to stay tuned for that. It's 7:23.